Welcome back to Cross Politic. This segment is brought to you by coffee.
Hey.
Cross Politic coffee, made by the Chocolate Knox in the studio.
Here we go.
And with us today we have Rebekah Merkle. It says you have dabbled in a number of occupations,
Get it, sis.
ranging from running her own clothing label to designing fabrics to becoming a full-time high school humanities teacher, playing poetry bingo with them. Her designs have been featured in a number of magazines, and she's edited a Brit-lit curriculum for Canon Press. But by far her proudest accomplishment is her crew of 5 outrageous, hilarious, high-speed teenage children.
That's awesome.
And her favorite role is that of wife to her similarly outrageous, hilarious, and high-speed husband, Ben Merkle. Hey, we had him.
He's kind of funny.
We like that guy.
Kind of.
I think he held back. She says he's hilarious.
We'll talk to him about that.
Yeah, I was like, So, this new book, Eve in Exile, The Restoration of Femininity, where does this book come from? How did it start? What?
That's a good question. Well, I don't know. I think it's been kind of been in the works for a long time because when I was at New St. Andrews,
Were you one
that
of
was a long
first
time
graduates of New St. Andrews?
I was one of 2.
Yes.
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 And the other one was the black guy. So for that brief shining moment,
Charles.
we had, so it was 50% black, 50% female.
Man.
Minorities are
I know.
ruling there.
I know. We
awesome.
did pretty good for that.
Somehow
for
that never
moment.
makes the headlines.
No, it didn't.
So real quick to interrupt you on that,
Yeah.
my brother graduated from high school in '95. And Dad was we were living in New Mexico. We were getting credit in the agenda. And my dad was like, hey, you should think about going to New St. Andrews. Of course, New St. Andrews started in 95, 94, so a year earlier.
Yeah.
And my brother got the credenda, looked at it and said, no, Dad, I want to go to a real school. So there you go. And of course, my brother,
Shame.
long story short, my brother graduates from NSA. There we go.
Which means eventually he did.
Yes. Anyway, so
Yeah.
that was when you were starting
Yeah.
the school and everything.
Yeah. But when, I was a senior, I had to write a thesis, and I did mine on treatment of women, how it relates to theology. So I did a sort of study of different cultures and treatment of women in those cultures, and looked at their theology and so forth. So I was just interested. I think it was also kind of a big topic at the moment, just locally,
Right.
and just the question of should women be educated. There were some kind of ultra-right people around at the time who thought women oughtn't to be educated because they just need to have babies. So that's pretty much it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was a live topic. And so anyway, that was part of the reason I was interested in writing about it for my thesis. And so, yeah, it's always just been, I have 3 girls. So, of course, thinking about,
Memoirs
how do you raise
to my
them? And, just what does it mean to be a woman? How do you do that right? How do you do it right in the middle of this nonsense that we have in our culture right now?
Right.
So.
And we're being told, we're being given a lot of answers to that question.
Yeah.
Like constantly. What are some of the, you've given us one wrong answer from maybe the ultra conservatives. What are the other wrong answers that we're being given?
Yeah. So, I saw it on the sort of the, fringe kind of people on the right where it's, why should a woman read a book? Why do you need to teach her math? There's no reason. Which is absurd, since most of the time that tended to go with homeschooling.
Yep.
And you're thinking, well, who do you think is going to educate your grandsons, for heaven's sakes?
She just does what I tell her to do. Teach him 1 + 1 today, woman.
I do remember telling a girl one time, like, what if you have to double a recipe someday? Like fractions, come on. But anyway, so I think that's one obvious wrong answer.
Right.
Which nobody ever talks about. No one ever corrects our side, right? Everybody's like, no, let them be. We got trouble on the other side.
Exactly.
So it's really good.
Exactly. And that was always just really annoying to me, that side of things. But of course, then you have the feminists and their various non-answers to the question of what does it mean to be a woman.
Yep.
And basically their answer is nothing distinctive anyway.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You got 4 sections in the book. And so I haven't finished it yet. I haven't finished your book yet. I'm halfway through. And so now you're going to give me like the Cliff Notes version of it. But you have 4 sections in here, and it starts with 2 distractions. And then you go on to interfeminism, right? Where you explain how we got here, what feminism actually is, which kind of where I'm at right now. And it was intriguing because it almost seems like feminism is really man's fault.
Well, and what isn't?
Well, no, but the reason I like this is because, you know, your dad kind of brought this up to me, Pastor Doug Wilson, which is, you know, you're the federal head of your house. So in one way or another, if you're having something fall apart in your home, you have to look at yourself and say, oh, Lord, where have I dropped the ball at? Forgive me. This is the same thing Job did, right?
Right.
And so going through this, it's amazing that it seems like husbands weren't caring for their wives and their duties and works is what ultimately it is, right? Go ahead.
Yeah. And I just think there were some really ridiculous expectations for women from the parts of history that we tend to think of as wholesome, and back when there were, you know, godly gender distinctions, the Victorian era or the 1950s. And I think those are the very things that set us up for feminism, because I think it was treating women like they aren't capable of real work, treating them like they don't need an education, like they are just decorative, you know, just stay in the house and be tidy. And I don't think women can handle that. And I think it just caused the, you know, various outbreaks that we've seen at different points. But yeah, I just think if you have the 50s, if you had the 50s again, which lots of Christians kind of want to go back to because it's just so cute.
I don't. Things weren't good for me during that time.
No, your wages were higher. Yeah, all right, we are going to go there. We're going to go there.
Whatever.
All right, I got some economic data for you later.
Yeah. That's all it was. It's just economics for me. Yeah, that's great. And anyway, you were saying, sis.
Yeah. But I just think if we recreated the 50s, I think we would immediately have the 60s again. I don't think that you can separate those 2 decades. And I think a lot of Christians try to. Like the 50s seemed super wholesome. 60s were where everything went bad. But I think the 60s were just a direct result of the 50s.
It was the blooming of the seeds that were sown in the 50s.
Yeah.
Well, and part of let me interrupt here. Part of what you're kind of analyzing in the 50s was that there's explosion in technology,
right?
Which mean women didn't have to basically build a garden in their own backyard. They didn't have to. They had a refrigerator. They had a toaster. They had all this new technology that actually put more time on their hands because they didn't have to do all this tasking work to make sure their kids didn't starve in the winter or were cold in the winter, that kind of thing.
Right, and I think that it kind of displaced the women. It was sort of like what used to be a craft, sort of like you could be replaced by appliances almost. You know?
So the toaster became your husband's helpmeet.
Right. And so rather than raising the bar for themselves, women didn't. They just kept the bar right where it was, but suddenly it was easy. Suddenly it was extremely attainable, and they just had a lot of time on their hands. They didn't, you know, to whom much is given, much is required. And I think that women should have started requiring more of themselves, but they didn't. Yeah. And then they started being depressed and, you know.
Well, but you kind of pin this on women a little more. I thought you were harder on women in the book than you were on men.
Yeah.
And in some senses, like, you know, the husbands weren't encouraging their wives to, you know, leading them in the right way in that era.
Right. Yeah.
But you were harder on women in the book.
Well, yeah, because that's who I'm talking to.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it's our fault. But so let's just, if we can for a moment, I mean, I know we can't always do this, but for a second, let's just act like we're reliving the 50s. And you're seeing that this is happening. What is it that women should have been doing now that the toaster, you know, now it takes 30 seconds to do toast instead of 3 minutes, you know, and
sounds so minimizing.
But I'm serious. Like, you know, making a quilt, you know, now you just go to the store and buy one.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, you're not spending 3 weeks to make a quilt, you know? So what is it that women now should look and say, okay, what should we have done? What was the thing that they should have done, knowing that they have all this extra free time?
Well, you know, I think it requires creativity. I mean, I think it requires looking around and thinking, okay, what has God given me? What can I do with this? Rather than just kind of settling in. And I think that, I don't know what exactly the women of the 50s should have done differently per se, you know, like in that decade.
Right.
But I think all the women today are in the same situation.
Yeah.
You know, you can either be a homemaker and be extremely low achieving, you know, just throw some dinner in the crock pot in the morning and wander around in your yoga pants and look at Facebook. I mean, you can.
Nailed it.
Tell us how you really feel.
Well, I mean, you can do that, or, you can take all the blessings that you have, the technology and the time and, everything that you have on your hands, and then you can try and turn a profit on it. And I think that's going to look different for every woman. I don't think there's going to be a perfect checklist, but I do think God's going to require, an answer from us of what did we do with the talents he gave us? Did we bury them, or did we, invest them and try and turn a profit?
Yeah, especially when you have little ones. I think that if you have so much free time on your hands with little ones, what are they doing over in the corner doing nothing? Like, I mean, now people give their kids tablets, and the tablet's raising them. So some of the practical things I guess we can do is say, hey, how about read a book?
Yeah.
Or there's other things, I think a lot of women are looking for, they agree with you, but like, what are some of the practical things I can do that are adding value to my house, to my home? I guess we'll get into some of that later, is like, what's a woman designed for?
Right.
But, when you look at, I guess the fifth, it's easy to look back because we can say, here are the things, this is where they missed the ball, this is where they dropped the ball at, this is what crept in, and this is why women in the 50s were bored.
Right.
So examining that, and you say this in your book, we're not trying to say, poke at them, but we're trying to observe the situation or to be able to change it.
Yeah.
So, what do you do now?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that have been lost, honestly, that I think, had been handed down from mother to daughter for centuries that are now almost obsolete.
That's right.
And, or they've just become this weird little craft or something, like it's not as necessary to know how to quilt, for instance, anymore. Right. So it's become like kind of a cute thing you do on retreats or whatever.
Yeah. Is that what
Who has time to do
is that
go
what
on
you do
retreats?
for those retreats?
Scrapbooking retreats and
Yeah.
stuff.
Pillow fighting, scrapbooking.
But I do think that there's a lot of just kind of inherited wisdom that it just took one generation to lose. It was like there's this gap, that things that like my grandmother's generation, every woman would have known how to do. It's just gone now. And so I think there's a lot of relearning some stuff that women should do. And I think it just requires, honestly, being interested and having a kind of the sort of attitude that's, I'm going to go figure this out. And then I'm going to try and be creative with it. And I'm going to try and, push it into the corners and see what I can do. And,
taking some dominion.
Yeah, exactly. Like innovation and not try and recreate. That's what I mean. I just think it's silly to try and recreate another era or another decade. But you can definitely learn from it and then try and make it applicable now.
So give some practical examples. What obviously it's not cookie cutter for every woman. It's going to look different for every woman. But what are some examples of doing that?
Yeah.
What do you do?
Part of it is I don't think there is a checklist. Like I kind of hesitate to give examples because I just think that it's such a huge bunch of opportunities, and I think it's the kind of thing that it's going to require a whole lot of women all rolling up their sleeves and saying, "Okay, let's figure this thing out and let's tackle this." So I don't think it's like I don't think I have the complete list, but I do think homemaking is a kind of has gone
making. Okay.
It's just like our expectations for that have fallen quite a lot. And like I said, it's just become so easy that it and I do think that there's a lot of possibilities there just in domestic arts that we don't even think of as arts anymore. We think of it as stupid, trivial, demeaning activities or silly crafts. And I don't think it has to be that. I really think there should be a recovery of the idea of domestic arts.
Well, and so it's interesting because in public schools, they're trying to teach this. Right? They have a home ec class now, they take. So somebody's considering this valuable.
Do they still have that?
No, they don't have it anymore. I don't think so.
Is that gone? Oh,
I'm pretty sure it's gone.
It was in the 1950s, David.
I haven't been to high school in a long time. They used to have home ec classes where they taught this.
But we are talking about, if we go back to Genesis and we look at what God tells Adam and Eve to do together. We're talking, so when we talk, we don't need to make a checklist, but we're talking about the options are as big as the universe.
Yeah.
Right. From your place, wherever God's placed you, whether you're a single woman on your own or whether you're a young married woman or you're a mother with children or grown children or a grandma or whatever, you have the world.
Yeah.
It's that big.
Yeah.
So there's not like, there's you have to be creative. You have to dream big, and you have to get your hands dirty and figure out where's God calling you.
And I do think that the thing that feminism has done has almost put up, Trump's wall between the world and the home. It's like you can either, you can go out there and fulfill your dreams
and be successful,
soar on wings like eagles, or you can stay in your stupid house and do nothing. And I think that that's the thing that even women who do stay home can kind of see it like that. Like, I don't really have any scope, but I'm doing the thing. I'm staying home.
Right.
Well, and I think here's part of the problem. So Toby's totally right. Amen. There's so much for women to take dominion over, so much opportunity to use your skills, how God has created you and what it created you for. But part of the problem, I think, that happens is like the same thing that happened in the garden. You had God gave every tree, and then there's one tree he said, do not taste, do not eat. And then what became the problem? That one tree. And the same thing, even I think that same problem happens when putting forward, kind of talking about the argument of women pastors or women in church leadership. God gives. You
don't get me in trouble again with my mom.
No. God says to the women in the church, says you can do all this stuff except for this one thing,
That's right.
And then what the conversation becomes about, it becomes like, why can't I be a pastor?
I felt like the Lord led me to be a pastor, David. I'm sorry.
But the blessing of God is given to where you're called, not to where you're not called. And we sit there, then we sit there and argue in that one area that God says, don't worry about that.
Right.
That's not you. That's not your gifts. Go somewhere else.
Yeah. And I think just seeing the home as actually an incredibly influential place,
right,
and strategic.
That's right.
And something
Absolutely.
that is a tool of dominion that will affect the world, rather than seeing it as this bizarre little place that is just a timeout.
Yeah. Keeping you back from what you really want to do. Right.
Well, this goes back to understanding like what it means. Human beings are the most valuable resource in the universe.
Human capital.
They're made in the image of God. There's nothing else in all of created. Everything's beautiful. There's tons of beautiful, awesome, exotic stuff. But the most valuable resource in the whole universe is human beings. And so if you have a house full of them,
that's right.
that you're molding and you're giving yourself to and raising them to be producers, to be fruitful, to take dominion, and so on. I mean, what higher gift? What higher power could there possibly be?
And when the Bible says, women should be keepers at home,
right,
and then we get all offended, and you're thinking, but God isn't asking half the human race to step out and do something insignificant.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a question of like, do you trust God or do you not? He's giving you something huge to do here.
Right.
And if you see it as huge, and the sort of thing that's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of study and a lot of practice, and there's a lot of responsibility.
Need to be a college course for stay-at-home moms, maybe.
Is it?
You can do it online.
Do you think sometimes? Do you think it's easy? Do you think maybe it's sort of a cop out? I mean, is it easier to just go get a job?
Yeah,
of course.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
Like I'm going to go. I'll fill this spot. 8 to 5.
Yeah, and somebody else will tell me what to do.
Right.
And I have my checklist, and I'll just do the thing he tells me to do, and I'll get my paycheck. Yeah.
Right. But it takes creativity and thoughtfulness to make a home.
Right.
And make people.
Right.
When we come back more with Rebekah Merkle, I want to get to what are women designed for, and then the last section, living out our design. Next with Rebekah Merkle.